dedicate this to you, Lord. The songs I chose about Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, it was intentional because the year began on a Shabbat. Was it coincidence? No, I do not believe so. And I have many reasons for saying this. I will not expound in depth, but I will say this. The call to Shabbat, the call to a Sabbath rest, is a prevailing banner the Lord has raised over the new year 22. Probably not a coincidence that the Hebrew alphabet has 22 letters. So there is something about the Hebrew factor, about the Hebrew heart of God, about the Hebrew scriptures and the Hebrew revelation of God that is related to whatever the Lord is doing this year. One of the things which comes across through the scriptures related to the Hebrew people is really a call to war. There has hardly ever been a time that the Jews have not been in war. But here is where war and Sabbath rest go hand in hand. Gideon met with Yahweh Shalom, before he attacked the Midianites, as you probably know. And so as we are actually in a season of war, a season of great confrontation, a season of great conflict, at the same time, we need to meet with the Lord of peace first, so that we can hold on to our peace and be standing ready with the preparation of the gospel of peace as we go to wrestle with the powers and principalities and the spirits of wickedness in the heavenly places. You see, this is a year of war. And this is where I was quite confused for some time. On the one hand, I was seeing the Lord speaking peace, speaking rest, speaking heavenly blessings and abundance and joy and promises fulfilled. And on the other hand, I could see the war going on, the war raging. And there were 3 prophetic words shared on the first Sunday of the year in 3 different churches. And they were very similar words. And the gist of all 3 were, do not be afraid of what's happening, of what's coming. So the Lord has been speaking to quite a few that we should not fear, and we should not let our heart be troubled by what's coming. But here is where I want to take you back to the last day of the last year. So it was the Friday, the 31st of December, 2021. And in the morning, Evie and I were praying. And towards the closing of our prayer, the peace of the Lord came upon us. And as I was quiet, it was like I was drawn into the Sabbath rest of the Lord, and I could feel I became immersed, or I went into a different spiritual atmosphere, and everything around me was shalom. But I realized I was actually having an experience of the future. And it became clear to me that the Lord was showing to me the closing of 2022, or a glimpse into 2022, if we could bring a whole year into a moment in time. And I was in shalom. I was in a place of rest, and I felt content, safe, protected, joyful. I felt everything is okay, everything is in place, nothing is wrong, nothing is missing. I could sense changes from the previous year, but You know, when you look at an entire year in a blink of an eye, in a moment, you don't pay attention to potential changes, but I could see that there were changes as compared to 2021, but let's not focus on that. So what did I tell you so far? Got into the new year with a feeling that I already know the end from the beginning, and it's going to be a year of Shabbat Shalom. But at the same time, I know, I have known, I feel, and I hear from the prophecies given to other people that we should not let our hearts be troubled and that we should not fear by the things which are coming. And so you go, okay, did I miss it? Or is it precisely because the war is going on? But those who stay very close to the Lord, those who raise the banner of Shalom, not only shall remain in peace, but actually it's a prerequisite to go to war. And now let's go a step further. Actually, perhaps staying in peace, maintaining Shalom, choosing the Sabbath rest, sometimes is warfare. When anxiety and fear, unrest, and other negative, dark feelings try to overtake you, and you raise the banner of Shabbat, and you stay in Shalom, and you do not allow the enemy to overtake you, you do not allow darkness to manifest, you do not allow your feelings to be overwhelmed by what's happening around, you just stay in the presence of God no matter what. Sometimes that is warfare. I mean, if we think of it in terms of not yielding to temptation, okay, let's not talk about sex, let's talk about food. Sometimes we feel tempted to yield to a dish that we know is not good for us, no matter how tasty it promises to be, and we choose not to yield. So we have overcome the temptation. Well, what if the temptation is to grow weary, to be disappointed, to be fearful, to be anxious? How do we not yield? How do we fight off, shake off temptation by remaining firm in what we know to be good, in what we know to be true? And so I see these two great opposites, the great conflict and the great peace of God, the great light and the great darkness in great conflict. In the midst of it all, I believe the Hebrew worship and the Hebrew revelation of God is of utmost significance for us to discover or rediscover, remember, or explore deeper. Because there are so many keys in the revelation that the Jewish people received from the Lord, which those who are not familiar with the scriptures, those who are not familiar with the Hebrew revelation of God, those who have been, I nearly use the word deceived, but that's a very strong word, so I'm not going to even think of it anymore. I will say, those of us who have been taught to think of God in a Western mindset, through a Western mindset, those who have associated our understanding of God with a Hellenistic, logical, rationalistic, intellectual type of understanding, which is a matter of doctrines and what is right and what is wrong. It's a matter of laws and rules and regulations. Those will have a problem to discern the heart of God, which is revealed through Hebrew scriptures written by Hebrew people who experience God in a Hebrew mindset, in a Hebrew heart that was not affected by the Hellenistic mindset. We're not affected by the intellectual perspective and perception of God, who were not affected by rights and wrongs and by doctrines, but they were affected by relationship. And in a relationship, the relationship can be more important than rules of right and wrong. And in a family relationship, children learn very soon that even though father and mother clearly give boundaries as to what is right and what is wrong, kids come to realize it's not the boundaries which are important. It is the relationship to the father and the mother. And that the relationship to the father and the mother can actually affect the boundaries, or whether the boundaries apply or not apply is a function of what is my standing with father and mother. Do they have to use rules to keep me in balance? Or are they happy with my relationship with them and they trust me? So where we stand before God in this new year will be greatly affected by relationship. The closer the relationship with Him, the more of His shalom will be in us and overflowing. The more God has been a God of doctrine, the more God for us has been our own perspective of deity. God is like this. No, God is like that. Well, I think of God, I believe God likes this. God does not like that. It's just we are so full of projections of our own mindset and culture, which we call God. And really it boils down to being our own projections, our own interpretations, our own cultural mindsets, our own ecclesiastical mindsets. But it's not the person. So those of us who have not had an intimate relationship with the Lord as between two lovers who know each other very well, those people will have a bit of a hard time this year, because God is in the business of destroying mindsets. God is in the business of overthrowing culture. God is in the business of setting things straight during this year. So now I'm going to move on to another concept, the concept of division. Think of the word division in the light of the word separation. Now, if you think of what is holiness, holiness is being separated from the world and being separated onto God. But that means there is a division in place. I become divided from the people with whom I used to walk in life, in the world. So holiness brings division. Now, separation, whether you think of it as a good dedication type of separation, or whether you think of it as a not so good division from other things, applies at very many different levels. And obviously the most basic level is division from the world to be separated onto God. But to the degree that the world is still in God's people, to the degree that the spirit of the world has crept into the institution of church, to that degree, there is a call for a separation from what some people could call the Babylon church, what other people could call the prostitute church. So actually what I see in this year is a division within the church as much as a division from the world. Because really here it's not about being separated from the world in a very general and generic term, but it's more like being divided from anything that is polluted and defiled by the spirit of the world. Because to the degree that we hold hands with the spirit of the world, to the degree that we compromise and tolerate the spirit of the world, to that degree, the spirit of the world will be influencing and affecting us and will be shaping our mindset, our emotional world, our choices in life. But to that degree, the death and the darkness, the grief, the depression, the fear, the anxiety, which are in the world, they will also overtake us. But on the opposite, to the degree that we become as free as possible from any association with the spirit of the world, to that degree we shall maintain our shalom, and we shall continue to live in a state of Shabbat, in a state of Sabbath rest, no matter what's going on around us. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah.
So I do see judgment, but we need to think of judgment in the sense of justice more than anything else. I do believe the Lord wants to reveal himself as the Lord of justice, but that means that unjust people shall be judged. It also means that if we have been perpetrators of injustice towards others, we should do well to clear the records as soon as possible, because we shall be found judged. Obviously, the purpose of it all is for the Lord to bring us to a place of purity. And that purity is very essential for the bride of Christ. And because this year, in terms of a higher perspective, a higher time perspective, is the beginning of a new 7-year period. And I'm talking with reference to the year 2000, when we came into the new millennium. Mm-hmm. So we've had 3 cycles of 7 years, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now we are in a new cycle of 7 years. And in this new cycle of 7 years, new things are beginning, completely new things. So during the prayer, before I began to share with you about the new year, if you remember, my prayer spoke about a new garden that needs to be remodeled, and we need to forget what the garden used to look like in the previous season. And so there will be quite a bit of remodeling in God's garden this year, as you and I, as individuals, are gardens of the Lord, but corporately, churches, ministries, houses of prayer, we are also corporately gardens of the Lord. And so the gardener has already started doing some pruning. The thing is, I see quite a bit of uprooting and new planting in this new year. In fact, happening as we speak. Let me say that this is not something entirely new. This is something that has already been happening, because God is in the business of discarding old mindsets. One of the prophetic words that came to my attention, I did not receive it personally, but one of the prophetic words that was spoken by a genuine prophet, according to my opinion anyway, and I believe it was of the Lord. It was a reminder of the scriptures that say that first God destroys and then he builds up. And so clearly, if there are corrupt houses, if there are just walls which are corrupt, then it's easier to bring down the walls and maintain the house. But if the entire house is corrupt, the entire house will fall. Because there is no place for corrupt homes any longer in this field of God. Now let's try to define this field in the context of what we know over the last 2 years that we got into the new decade of the 20s. As you remember, the Lord said that in the beginning of the 20s, we were given an opportunity to transition from the desert to the promised land. But that was a major shift at the time because we needed to leave behind the Moses mindset of the desert, the living in the tent and moving around mindset of the desert, to shift into a new mindset, which would be the Joshua mindset, which is associated with the Lion of the tribe of Judah, aggressive, attacking, conquering, dispossessing, to bring the kingdom of God in areas where God has not been before. Now, we can apply that to our individual lives. We can apply that to our families, but maybe we can apply it to our churches and cities and nations. Each one will have to see how that principle applies, assuming we are among the people who made the transition from the desert to the promised land. Now, I believe, and I believe there is plenty of evidence to prove it, that I as an individual and the ministry which I lead has indeed made the transition. And so in the process of the last 2 years, the transition has manifested in real, tangible terms in multiple of ways. The old has been left behind. There is a new thing in place. And as you probably heard me say, in the desert, when we think of the history of the Hebrew people, in the desert, they did not have access to any of the promises of God, which were promises for the promised land. For example, blessed you shall be when you go out, blessed you shall be when you go in. Blessed will be the work of your hands, blessed will be your field, but they did not have fields in the desert. They were just moving around. In the desert, they lived on the basis of God's provision. In the promised land, we are called to live. I'm not saying without God's provision. I am saying that God's provision is to be given by the blessed land, which we work, and the land is so blessed that the land yields its crops. And the land is so blessed that the rain always comes on time. And this is reference to Deuteronomy 11:11. It may not be too much of a coincidence, even though I don't really want to make too much of it, that Deuteronomy 11:11 adds up to 22 this year. But the Deuteronomy 11:11 word was the main word, was the key word of the Lord for the new decade. And I do believe it remains a relevant and very important word. And here is what it says. But the land which you cross over to possess is a land of hills and valleys, which drinks water from the rain of heaven, a land for which the Lord your God cares. The eyes of the Lord your God are always on it, from the beginning of the year to the very end of the year. And what I'm saying is this: in the desert, this did not apply. So if we have made the transition in the process of the last 2 years, if we have not been left behind to continue wandering in the desert, then this is the 3rd year in the promised land. This is a time to begin settling in a land of blessing. This is a time to begin settling in a land where the hand of the Lord is blessing the land, so that the land yields its crops, so that the land gives a peaceful life in abundance. Now let's think of the word abundance. John 10:10 says, I've come that they may have life and have it in abundance, which is a translation of what can be better translated as, and have it overflowing. And so there is a call of God for us to step into the overflowing, but that does not happen without war. That does not happen without dispossessing those who kept the land from us, so that we can bring in the presence and the blessing of the Lord in the land of the living. You realize that we're talking about powers and principalities, world rulers, and spirits of wickedness in the heavenly places. And we are talking about the land of our own lives. We're not talking about taking any other person's land. We are talking about how we live our lives in this world on the basis of God's presence, God's blessing, God's change of the rules of the game, as it were. There are certain rules of the game which prevail in the world, well, not necessarily for us if we are with the Lord. But to experience this change of the rules of the game, we need his supernatural presence and his supernatural power, and that does not come cheap. It starts with a very intimate, a very close relationship with him. It goes through obedience in everything that he says that we should do, and it is maintained by us making the time to stay in his Sabbath rest, so that it's not quite us who do things, it is he who does the things, as we invite him and as we allow him, while we maintain our peace in the midst of an ongoing conflict. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Even the news reveal the lack of stability in everything around us, in the economy, in the relationship between Russia and NATO and the European Union. Please look at something hidden behind the lines. In previous decades, war in Israel was in the front line of every newspaper, of every article, so to speak. Have you noticed how people don't really care much about Israel and about the Middle East anymore? Have you noticed how attention has shifted away from the so-called Palestinian cause? So if you think of it as a strategic move of God, God used a president of the US to change the embassy to Jerusalem. In his reign, in his rule, there was peace with certain Arab nations. The atmosphere changed. Then the fear was imminent that this would be reversed. But God made certain strategic moves around the world, whether you call it China and the South Pacific or Russia and the Ukrainian thing. And suddenly nobody cares about Israel anymore. Suddenly, in the global scheme of things, who cares about where the embassy of the US is in Israel? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you see, God is still working to protect the land that he has blessed. At the same time, the people in the land that he has blessed are also undergoing chastisement through COVID, which is a global rod of chastisement by the Lord. But I'm not going to go into that in detail. But I suppose by now everybody understands that we could not have COVID doing what it does unless God had authorized it, right? I'm not saying God does it. I'm saying God has authorized it to happen. And so there are crises all around, and apparently there will be more crises. So there is an economic crisis that is looming because of the energy high cost.
Yes.
You realize that that will cause a spiral. There will be side effects. So what I'm saying is, yes, the world is shaking really bad, and it will continue to shake. Does it serve God's kingdom? Oh, perfectly. Whether you call it the Middle East or the church, it really is all about the kingdom of God. Because in the midst of shakings, in the midst of death prevailing, people have no option but to turn to God. So it really is all about the gospel of the kingdom expanding in every sense of the way. So everything that's going on is serving our Lord's purposes on earth. And if we remain in peace and work with him, we shall ride the waves together with him. So I think my close will be this. The Lord did say to me that we need to be ready, like those who surf the waves, and they are ready for the wave to come, to ride the wave. And we need to be ready and prepared at all times. And if we are found ready when the wave is coming, then we shall ride the wave. The wave will not overtake us, and we shall be in the forefront of what God is doing in this new year.